Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We are thrilled to kick off this exciting AMA session in which we diving deep into topic like open source contribution, developer relations at Google, and WordPress core computer expertise. If you are a developer and curious to know the value of contribution and how they can benefit you, so this AMA is for you. So our esteemed guest for today's session is Adam Silverstein. Adam is a developer relations engineer at Google. Adam is a key figure in the WordPress community, contributing his expertise as a prominent WordPress core committer, thus playing a pivotal role in the ongoing advancement of the platform. To our viewers, feel free to ask Adam your burning questions by dropping them in the chat. Firstly, Adam, a big thank you for taking the time to join us for this enlightening session. I am confident both myself and our viewers will gain valuable insight from your experience. Now, Adam, we are eager to learn about your journey. Could you share with us when you start your journey with the tech industry, your journey with Google, and how long have you been involved with the WordPress platform?
Sure. I'll try to be very brief. Back when I was a young man and I was going to school, I got really into newspapers and publishing. And that eventually led me to building websites for people. I started my own little company. I had my own agency building websites. Back in the day with HTML and CSS and Dreamweaver, eventually I discovered WordPress as a platform that I could build on top of as a developer, but also hand over content management duties to my clients. So I would build sites and then the clients could edit their content. That was a revolution for me. So WordPress as a content management system came in early in my days. I spent many years building sites on top of WordPress. Eventually, I became interested in actually contributing to WordPress itself. I saw some things I wanted to fix. Someone encouraged me to release some of the work I was doing as a plugin. So I released a plugin and I became intrigued with sort of the WordPress way of developing. So I became deeply involved around, I think, version 3.6, which is now over 10 years ago. And I helped rebuild the revisions feature for WordPress, which was a really fun project. It was like a rebuild of something, but it was also a great way for me to level up my skills. I learned Backbone along the way and became really familiar with how WordPress manages revisions. And now I maintain that component to this day. Eventually, I got a job at 10up, which is an agency that builds enterprise WordPress sites. This was really based on the work that I had done in core. That's directly led to that job. And of course, working at 10up was a whole different thing than building the little websites that I was building now. It was a whole team of people building sites with agents, developers, designers, front end, back end, and it was huge sites with millions of impressions. And the scalability factor was much more important. Eventually, that led me to Google. I did help 10up work on creating the Sitekit plugin, which is a Google product. And that was sort of my first involvement with working with Google. And eventually I joined Google to help with that product, with Sitekit, and then also with just developer relations in general, but specifically in the CMS ecosystem and primarily in WordPress. I hope that was quick enough. That's the synopsis.
Yeah. So it's truly inspiring to hear about your journey, Adam. So without further ado, let's dive into some of the questions submitted by our audience. Remember, our viewers can also submit their live questions in the chat. So Adam will answer your questions if you have any. So Adam, let's address the first question from Stephen. And he is asking the question is related to open source contribution. And the question is for developers like me who have been eyeing the open source arena, could you share some tips for developers interested in contributing to open source but need help knowing where to start?
Sure. I agree that is a really hard problem, knowing where to start. And contributing to open source is not an easy thing to get started with. I think for me, what was really helpful was there was something I was really interested in fixing. Like I saw a bug in a thing that I was using in my work day to day. And because it was open source, I was able to go and fix that bug. And that experience, I've repeated that over and over again, contributing to many different projects. If projects are open source and you can find a bug that you have found, that's a really good motivation for you to go fix it. Another thing is a lot of projects, like I'm most familiar with WordPress and Gutenberg, which is a WordPress project but is maintained in a separate repository. Both of them have new good bug tags. So you can go into the WordPress track, which is where we do all of our bug tracking. And there's actually a way to search in there for bugs that are good for new contributors. And these are bugs that tend to be isolated. They're a small surface area. They don't impact a lot of other things. So the changes are very small that you need to make. And seasoned developers like myself, we will leave those tickets untouched so that new contributors can come along and take them. They're often used at contributor days, like when we have the big WordCamps. We have a contributor day, and we'll often just go through those good first bug tickets. So find something you're passionate about, that you care about, that motivates you. And then secondly, like find a welcoming community. WordPress certainly is one that encourages new contributors. There's all kinds of channels in WordPress. We have there's mentor programs for new contributors. Contributor days are a great way to get involved in WordPress contribution, where you go to a WordCamp. It can be either one of the big ones or a regional one. And there's a whole bunch of people all in a room together trying to contribute. And there's really nothing like that feeling of camaraderie when you're trying to do open source. So hope that answers it.
Yeah. And hopefully you are also going to WordCamp Europe 2024.
Yes.
So those who want to connect with Adam, so you can find him in WordCamp Europe as well.
Yeah,
so,
and sign up for the contributor day. I'll be there leading the performance table at the contributor day. So
yeah, that is important for the developers. So the next question we have from Alessandro, and the question is, what effective approaches have you found for engaging fellow developers and encouraging them to contribute to the projects?
Mm-hmm. So this is a great question. Whole books have been written on the topic of maintaining open source projects. And I think it is something that everyone has their own approach. But one thing I like to do is first start by thanking people for trying to make a contribution. A very common thing in WordPress is people will come by and they open a ticket, and it's their first ticket. And so a really good way of encouraging them is just to basically thank them for showing up and taking the time to create a ticket. Because even if maybe they don't have the right answer, or the bug is actually an expected behavior, they've taken all this time to go out of their way to create the ticket. So I think acknowledging people is really important, although that might be a Western American bias. I know some of my colleagues who like Swiss, they're much more direct with their feedback. And so I don't know, that's just me personally. I think another thing is letting developers make choices instead of telling them what to do. Oftentimes in a ticket, when you're discussing a technical approach, there's no one clear solution, but developers might be going in a direction that you think is wrong as the seasoned developer. So instead of telling people they're wrong, I try to give them options, like maybe this is a better way, or maybe this is a better way. So by giving people choices, you give them kind of agency to make their own decisions about how they're going to solve the problem. So I tend to do that a lot. I think, like I said, I think it's important to acknowledge, even for someone like me who's been doing like WordPress contribution for a decade, it's important to remember what it felt like back when we started, and it was very intimidating. But also when a seasoned developer comments or supports you, it feels amazing. Like you feel like you've really accomplished something. So I think as someone who's been around for a while, I try to remember that, and I try to be very supportive of new people. So hopefully that answers it. I think there's other parts about it too, where sometimes people are disruptive in open source, where people come in and they're very disagreeable, or they have one way they want to do things and they don't listen to what you have to say. So sometimes you have to deal with conflict, and that can also be another kind of challenge. But I do think the key to success in open source is good, clear communication. And that is really challenging in writing, like communicating to people in writing. And often there's cultural differences. Like I mentioned, like I always like to thank people, and I'm sort of very, I guess, American about that. But sometimes people are very direct, and that can be misinterpreted, especially in writing. Like when you're talking to someone, you have all these visual cues that you're communicating. When you're writing, it's more difficult. So I guess another way is like getting together physically with people is a way to encourage development, like having contributor days and those kinds of things.
And also follow up question on this question, like for the non-developer people, those
Yeah.
who are not a developer, so there are many other channels that the documentation, the polyglot, so people also can contribute in on these channels as well. So could
Yes.
you please
There's
describe like a little bit about these channels as well?
Yeah, there are so many. I think there's maybe like, I don't know, 15 different teams in WordPress.
Yeah,
Documentation is a great example of something where you can go through and help document things, and that's a way for you to learn. It's you don't really need a lot of skills. Translation is another thing.
yeah,
Core itself and also plugins are translated by the community. So if you speak a language, more than one language, you can go in and help translate WordPress core into your other language or to the languages that you speak. And those things don't involve any code. There's people who are doing marketing, people who are doing education in WordPress. There's a whole page. I don't remember all the teams right now, but there are a lot of ways to contribute.
yeah,
I think one of the challenges that we have in general in open source is how to acknowledge those contributions, how to thank those contributors. In
mm,
core, we have this really great credits page. So if you make a core contribution during a release of WordPress, when the next version of WordPress comes out, you can go to the credits page and you will see your name on that page.
yeah,
And that is a really exciting reward for developers. They can, everyone knows about WordPress. They can tell their parents about it. Look, my name, I helped make this product. It feels really good. When you contribute to documentation, we're not as good about rewarding people. We're trying to do more of that. Another thing is testing. So like as a developer, you have to understand the code, but as someone who's just testing a bug, you don't actually have to understand the code. So you can go and you can read the bug description, and a good bug description will say, here's how to reproduce the problem.
mm,
And you can go through the steps to reproduce the problem. And then we have a really easy way now where you can check out bug like fixes in Playground. So you just like click on a link and you open it up. You don't actually have to install WordPress or anything. So you can actually test the fix. So we need people when there's a bug that's reported and then there's a fix that's provided. We still need people to go through and like reproduce the bug, reproduce the fix, and say, yes, this is good. I tested it. I confirm this is good. As someone who commits the code,
yeah,
that
mm,
gives me a lot of confidence to be able to go, okay, like someone else has verified this is an actual problem. This actually fixes the problem. That gives me more confidence to go in and make the commit.
truly
So
makes sense.
lots of ways.
Yeah,
There's so many.
yeah, yeah, truly makes sense. So another question, it's a big question from Sarah, and it's about uh, inclusivity, I think. Yeah. So the question is, as a freelancer working on PHP projects while navigating the challenges as a person with a disability, I am curious about your perspective on ensuring inclusivity and diversity within open source communities. Could you share some insight on the steps individuals like myself can take to continue to a more inclusive environment?
Yeah, I mean that's a multi-part question. I feel,
Yeah, it's a big
um,
question that I got. Yeah,
I think when you say people with disabilities, I think we tend to think a lot like that. Immediately makes me think of accessibility and the work we do to try to make WordPress more accessible. And I think that's been a really big challenge for the project. I think that's a challenge in tech in general, that accessibility tends to get put off as a last step. But I think one thing that's important to remember about accessibility is it's not just people who are like blind or who like can't use a mouse at all. There's all different like levels of disability. So there's
yes,
people who just have
agree.
visual impairment, they can't see things really well, or they have a shake, so they can't use a mouse as easily. There's all kinds of levels of disability, and anything that we do to make WordPress or software in general more accessible actually benefits
Mhm.
everyone with all of those disabilities. So I think that's one really important thing. I think we have suffered in WordPress from not having enough attention on accessibility, and oftentimes like a new feature will land in Gutenberg and then someone from the accessibility team will say, hey, this isn't accessible. Like, why don't you fix these problems A, B, and C? And then we sort of like reluctantly go through this fixing process. Instead, my belief is that like accessibility should be built in from the get-go. And there's probably more that, browser vendors can do. There's a lot of things that web developers build that probably should just be built into the platform and be accessible by default. One example that I think of is the quick fill like autocomplete dropdown. So like an example of this in WordPress is if you go into the editor and you're choosing the user for a post. If you have many, many users on your site, instead of
Mhm.
just a dropdown, if you have more than 100 users, you get this nice little box that you can type into and it fills in. And that is very difficult to build in an accessible way. And there's all kinds of projects that have tried and failed. It would be great if browsers just had a component like that built in, right? Like, why should every web developer have to do that? I think the second part of the question was about ensuring inclusivity and diversity.
Diversity, yes.
Which, you know, for people with disabilities, that means making sure that like our events are accessible to people with disabilities. But I think that's a much broader question about like how do we include more people of color or more women or just underrepresented groups. And you know, I think there are some really good ways. I think like I asked, one of the things I asked WordCamp Asia 2 years in a row now, they've done an amazing job of having a super diverse set of speakers. And I asked them, like, how did you achieve this? Because I've seen a lot of other WordCamps say they wanted to, but not really achieved it. And what they told me was they actually, I mean, this was the general approach. This isn't the exact approach, but they actually divided the pool into two groups. And they it wasn't just two, but they said like, okay, we're going to look at this half of just female applicants, and these are just male applicants, or we're just going to look from this group of people who are from our region, and we want to get enough speakers from our region. So they basically divided the applications into pools, and then they took some talks from each of those pools, and that ensured that they had a set number of talks, and that way it created an opportunity for everyone. So I like that approach. I think it is super challenging. You know, I personally like to really support the people who I see who are different and are excelling in our community. But I think it's a long-term challenge in tech in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the experts are working on the solutions, and they are working on a daily basis to provide the inclusivity and diversity to the people who are open to work with the worldwide open to work. So uh, so let's discuss something about related to your position as a developer relations at Google. So
Okay.
I have a question that is like from my side. So can you share some insight into how Google fostered collaboration and engagement within the developer community?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bigger question about all of Google's open source efforts. So Google has a huge open source team. We've got many open source projects. Google runs open source conferences. Google shows up at open source conferences, whether it's, you know, Linux Foundation or it's WordPress. So I think that's one way. We put out a lot of documentation. The thing that I'm mostly, so, you know, I say I work at Google. Google is this giant company. So I really should be more specific and say that I'm on the Chrome team. So I'm on the team of people doing developer relations for the Chrome web browser. But Chrome is actually a little bit bigger than the web browser, right? There's Chrome Embedded, there's Chrome Auto, there's Chrome Books, there's Chrome OS, there's all these different parts of Chrome. But in Chrome developer relations, what we're trying to do is help developers build with Chrome, right? We want dev tools, for example, to be the best possible tool for developers. And I think the way that we help open source is by making as much of our work as open as possible. So right now, for example, our focus has been on Core Web Vitals, which is this metric for how users experience the web. It's basically performance, but it's not performance like we used to think of performance maybe 5 or 10 years ago as like the time to first byte, like how quickly can the server respond with the web page. Now, these new metrics are really about how users experience the page. And all of the data that we collect and use is all open. So this is a really good example of how we use open data to sort of try to move the ecosystem. Like the goal of Core Web Vitals is to give you a measurement tool that you can use to improve your websites, to improve your development, make your websites better for users. So, but how do we convince people, like how do we educate people about how their sites are doing, like in an open way with open data? That's the best way. So we have all this data that we collect from Chrome users who opt in, and we open that up in the Crux user data set. We've got HTTP archive, which is a data set that we maintain that's also open, or even tools like Lighthouse. which a lot of developers use for performance analysis. There is a lot of parts of that that are open source, so you can actually go in and see how the metrics are being read, how they're being created. You can provide. We have stack packs, like where you get the specific recommendations for WordPress. That's all open source. So I think it's a really big question, like how does Google foster collaboration? But I think basically just by showing up, by being present in these communities, by meeting with developers. As a developer relations engineer, my role is both to go out into the community and tell developers about new things that are coming to the platform, like speculation rules API, but also to take feedback from developers back to the people building the APIs, back to the Chrome engineers, and saying, here's what WordPress developers are struggling with. So I think listening to developers is a really important part of it, and having developer relations engineers actively engaged in the communities.
Okay, so let me put the question 5 for the developer relations to the second, as the question is big, and hopefully when we discuss this question, we will get answer of multiple questions as well. So it's a detailed question, as WordPress has its Slack channel for different communities, as we discussed, such as core, polyglots, and documentation. So the person is curious, like, about how Google's work specifically. Like, I have been exploring initiative like Google Summer of Code, security patch rewards, Kubernetes with Google. Are these considered Google open source communities, and what is the easiest way to get a start with them? And the follow-up question in the same question is, like, how does this participation enhance our chances in the recruitment process at Google as well?
Yeah, great question. So there is a website that's just opensource.google that lists all of Google's open source projects, including the ones you mentioned, like Google Summer of Code, but also Google Season of Docs and some other projects that Google has. Those are great things to get involved in. Like, I know the Summer of Code, I've been involved on that as a Googler and had people come in and work on a project. Super exciting opportunity to like get to work directly on a real project with Googlers. Let me go back to the question so I make sure I answer all the parts of the question. So yeah, those are great ways to get involved, and they're all I think they're all remote now. Some of these things you used to have to attend in person, but now they're remote, so they're gonna be available to almost everyone. They're definitely going to benefit your career. Like, anything you do like this will benefit your career. Any kind of contribution you have to open source will benefit your career. I wouldn't say that working on a Google open source thing will directly help a Google recruitment effort. I think any open source thing you worked on, and the reason is because when you go into an interview, right? So, I mean, first of all, you have to get your foot in the door. You have to get whoever's recruiting you to look at your resume and think, this might be someone who we could hire. So obviously having some experience with open source projects or just any type of work that you can show that you've done is very helpful. But then once you get in the door, you're going to go through an interview process, no matter what company you apply to. And Google's interview process is notoriously difficult, with you having to do 5 in-person interviews and writing code by hand and all this, very challenging stuff. But in any case, no matter what place you interview at, they're going to ask you about what work you've done, what experience you've had, or tell me about an experience that was challenging. How did you overcome it? Working in open source, working with any of these Google open source projects will give you that experience to be able to answer those questions in a meaningful way in an interview. So, I think I've worked as a mentor for a lot of young beginning developers, junior developers, and it is very challenging to get your first job, right? You often wind up just having to volunteer somewhere, build a website for your cousin, and that gives you the experience. And then you can say, look, I built this, like, I'll build your website too. And then pretty soon you've got 5 websites that you built. Now you have a portfolio, you can build your own website, you've got a company. But getting that first one is really challenging. And I think that's just, in general, it's very difficult to sort of break into the industry. Open source is a way for you to sort of volunteer, but also have somewhere to show. You can point to that work. You can point to the ticket. You can point to the GitHub repo. You can show the conversation. A lot of getting hired is not about your technical skill. It's about your communication skill. It's about how you do in the interview when the interviewer asks you a challenging question, when they change the requirements on you midstream, when they introduce some new complexity. How do you respond to that? And working in open source is a great way to build those skills, because you're going to get challenges. You can get people coming in disagreeing with you. You're going to have differing opinions. You're going to have things you work on that people will reject. You're going to have all of the experiences that you need to be able to talk about why you're a good person for the job. So to me, the answer is yes, it will help you, but it's not because it's a Google thing. It's just because it's a really valuable experience to do work in open source. And especially if you're new, like these opportunities are not plentiful. They're hard to find. So if you have an opportunity, jump on it.
Precisely, you describe it well. The next question we have is related to what resources and support does Google provide to developers who are interested in leveraging Google technologies for their projects?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I can mostly only speak to the little tiny part of Google that I work on, but I mean, it's all about tools, right? We provide so many tools for developers, and part of that is we want, as Chrome, we want developers using Chrome, so we want to have the best tools for developers. Documentation is really important. Like we go to great lengths to make sure everything is very well documented. Even just the way like Google builds APIs is very standardized. I worked on the Sitekit project a lot, and that is a WordPress plugin that interfaces with Google APIs, entirely with Google APIs. So it's an external product. It's from Google, but it operates externally. It's not like running internally at Google. It runs just like any other WordPress plugin. And the documentation for the APIs is amazing. It's so thorough. It's so up to date. And part of that is because there's really excellent systems internally that Google has built around building APIs and automatically documenting them. So the same thing, like, any tool that we create, or like this Core Web Vitals initiative that I'm closely working on. So first they had to define the specifications for how do we measure user experience on the web. That took them years to do that. But now that we have them, like, it is available across so many different tooling surfaces. It's available in DevTools. It's available in Lighthouse. It's available in PageSpeed Insights. You can, get a trace and then put the trace in a tracing tool. Like, there's so many tools that Google builds for developers to help them make websites better. The whole material design effort, like there's all these different efforts that I can think of that just are about making the web better. All the efforts around PWAs and Fugu capabilities. Right now, I think one other one that I'll mention that I think is actually going to really help developers is there's sort of two parallel efforts for standardizing web technology. So one of the most painful parts for web developers in every survey, year after year after year, is keeping up with the technologies and making sure that the code that they're writing is compatible with all the different browsers. So there's two efforts right now that that Google has embarked upon with other vendors that I think are really going to help here. One is called Baseline, and this is a set of APIs and features essentially that are available across all of the modern browsers. And so it's similar to like Can I Use, if you go to Can I Use and look up a feature, but this tagging Baseline, which you'll see on MDN docs and on Chrome docs, means that if you see something is in Baseline, it means it's available everywhere. So you as a web developer know if it's in Baseline, I can use it. So that is really helpful because you don't have to suddenly look up everything. If you stick to that baseline set of features, and each year that will get updated as the browsers progressively add features, then the baseline will grow. The second one is an effort called Interop, and this is again a cross-browser effort to kind of fill in pain points that developers have. So every year there's a survey that's put out. It's open to developers. I've been announcing it on the WordPress developer blog. And developers can open issues, and then it gets sort of voted up and down through a process. All the major browsers, so we're talking, Chrome, Safari, Firefox. Those three, they agree. Okay, we're gonna try to have all these features in our browser by next year. And there's it's gamified. There's like a little scorecard. But this is basically a way for the browsers to sort of work collectively in a competitive way to try to make the features more standardized. And I think having more standardized features that you can rely on as a developer is really going to help web developers. So just another way.
Yeah, just to add one thing, like as I personally use Page Speed Insight, and I ran a speed up challenge on Cloudways. So I made a criteria like you have to submit your results on a Page Speed Insight and then share the results with me.
Yeah.
So on the basis of those results, I will check the results and then announce the winner. So Page Speed Insight is a very good tool, and the suggestion just under the test are very helpful for you to like improve the performance of your website. So
Yep.
this is the one example that I am using with my all like daily projects.
Great. Yeah, it's a great tool.
Yeah. Let's jump towards some WordPress core computer expertise. The first thing that uh, I want to discuss with is the question is from Julio, and first thing he is asking is like, one thing that's unclear to me is the distinction between a core contributor and a core committer in the WordPress context.
Sure. So a core contributor is anyone who contributes to WordPress core to any specific release. Like I said, that credits page. And you can be a contributor by adding code to fix a ticket, but also if you come in and test a fix, like I mentioned that you can do testing, or even if you leave a detailed bug report, like that's contributing. You're a contributor. So typically a release might have several hundred contributors. I think some of them have even had like 400 or 500 contributors, which is really amazing. Core committer is a much smaller group. I think it's about 50 people in the world. There might be 25 of us who are active. And these are the people who actually commit the code into WordPress itself. So we have access to doing SVN commits. We do everything in SVN, which is similar to Git. It's an older system for managing code. And we are the people who basically are the final approvals of any code that goes into WordPress core.
Okay. So the difference is clear to you, Julio, hopefully. So the next question is, it's a big question. And as a non-developer utilizing WordPress for my design business website, I often find areas that could benefit from improvement. I am curious about how feedback on new releases is gathered and communicated to the developers working on them. Frankly, I believe the WordPress dashboard should be revamped. How does your team collect and rely user feedback for consideration in upcoming releases?
Yeah.
So the question is related to like the WordPress dashboard is not looking good. How we can give feedback to the developers, those who are working on these things,
Yeah.
something like that.
And I'm not going to disagree that the WordPress dashboard could use some improvement.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. For specific releases, like when a release comes out, there's a release post that's put up on the Make WordPress blog. And commenting on that is actually a really good way to give feedback about that release. So people who do the release, they definitely read all those comments. Each release has a release squad. It's a group of people who are responsible for the release lead, the technical lead, the docs lead. So it's a squad of people who work on the release. They definitely take that feedback. They read the feedback. But also at the beginning of a release, there's kind of a process where we sort of decide what we're going to work on in the release. And that's often done, again, on the Make WordPress blog. So I would say leaving comments on the Make blog is a good place. For bigger efforts like a new feature, we often will open up an issue or a ticket to have discussions on that. So right now, development in WordPress is kind of happening in two places. One is the WordPress core track, and the other is Gutenberg. So anything related to the editor or theming at this point is done in Gutenberg. And in Gutenberg, what they're really trying to do now, it's a very fast-moving project, so it's hard to follow, but they're trying to have these big overview issues where when they're working on a new feature like the fonts API or I don't know, some other big feature, they kind of cover it all in one place. And that gives you, as someone giving feedback, a place to go. Now, this person said that they're a non-developer, so I probably should shift a little bit. So as a non-developer, I do think it is challenging to find a good avenue to give feedback. The decisions are not made in one place, right? The decisions are, and that's one of the challenges. They're dispersed. Like we have these weekly meetings, but we don't tend to make decisions on them. The decisions tend to be made in much like on these individual tickets where code is being worked on, where a new feature is being worked on. For something as big as like, okay, I want to rewrite the dashboard. needs to get rewritten, or we need to redesign the post list page, let's say. Typically that happens, the way that would happen would be through, like, someone would make a proposal. Let's do this. Let's make auto updates, work. And they write a blog post proposing the feature, what it would mean, possible risks, like a whole post. And then there's a discussion that happens in comments. And that's the biggest way that we sort of move forward with big decisions. But we don't really have a way for like end users to give us feedback about their experience. I think that's probably on us, like as a community, build better channels. We did used to do more like user testing sessions. Like I remember when Gutenberg first came out, they were actually doing them at WordCamps where they had like a little booth set up and you could come try the new editor, and then you would try it and then you would give feedback right there. So I don't know. I mean, there's taking feedback, but there's also like, how does that feedback actually get into people who are going to make the decisions? Each release is led by a different group of people. We do have these bigger posts. I guess one other place that would be appropriate is, we've been talking for several years now about the 4 phases of Gutenberg. Right now we're in phase 3. There were a series of posts, probably about 6 different posts that went out last summer, I think. But they're on the Make WordPress blog. And if you search for like phase 3, you'll probably find them. But they're all about these new things we're going to build, like rebuilding the media is one of the posts. And like, that's a great example. The media library in WordPress, really solid thing that's been there forever, but it also desperately needs a redesign. Like everyone wants to redesign it, but no one wants to touch it. But that post, when that came out, that would be a great place as just a user to come in and say, here's my experience. Here's what I like about using. Here's what doesn't work for me. Like giving feedback as a user is helpful to developers, but there's like limited opportunities. So I would say trying to follow the Make blog, I guess. And when you see new announcements, then trying to contribute there just by leaving feedback.
Perfect. The last question that I have is, as a WordPress core committer, what advice would you give to developers who want to make meaningful contribution to the platform?
Right. Okay. I mean, I think if you are open to learning JavaScript, I would say get involved in Gutenberg, because Gutenberg is where most of the action is happening right now in WordPress. WordPress core, the old part of WordPress core is the less exciting part. But I mean, obviously the editor is built on top of WordPress core, and there's still a lot to do in WordPress core. It's not like the problems have gone away or we don't have things to do. So I would say, if you know JavaScript, learn Gutenberg, learn how to extend Gutenberg. I would say try to look at those good new bugs to just try to get familiar with things. If you can find an area that you really are interested in and can become really proficient at, then you'll become really valuable to the community. So the 2 areas that I've gotten really involved in is revisions, because I rewrote the UI for it. So I had to understand how the backend worked. And now I've become deeply involved in media because I've helped land WebP support and AVIF support in the last few releases. And in order to do that, I've had to dig deep into the code of how media works and better understand it. So I think finding something that you're genuinely personally interested in is a great way to like leverage your skills and give you the motivation. In terms of like meaningful contribution, I think latching onto what's being worked on in a release is a really helpful thing to do. So like that initial thing that I did, the reason I worked on revisions was that's what they were working on for the 3.6 release. They announced, we're going to work on this. Who wants to help? And I raised my hand, So I think raising your hand is like number one, showing up, volunteering for things. I know there's significant efforts going on in 6.6 around there's fonts API improvements. There's a whole list of things right now we're discussing in the core Slack channel. I'm not going to try to name them off, but if you show up for that weekly meeting, there's a weekly meeting in core Slack. The core, and if you can't make that due to time zones, just read the back channel, because I realize not everyone can come to these meetings. But there's lots of different projects going on. Just show up, volunteer, even if you don't know anything about the thing. If it looks interesting to you, all it takes is coming to the ticket and saying, I would love to help with this. End of story. You will find that if just expressing that interest, you will get people like myself or other seasoned contributors going, here, that's great. Here's how you can help. Why don't you test this? Could you help me with this? There's many opportunities. It's hard to get started, but just expressing your interest can be really useful.
Now, just to add, the meetings in the core or all the Slack channels are not like the meeting that we are doing. It's a textual meeting. So if you miss the meeting, so you can also read out the text later on when you find the time. So please do
Yep.
join the channel and start firstly reading like what's going on in the channel, and then you have an idea like how you can start contributing to the platform. So that is
Exactly.
also the way. Yeah.
Yep.
So, Adam, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. We have covered a lot of ground, and while we have more questions, I have tried to capture the essence within our time frame. So, before we wrap up, I want to know everyone how they can stay connected with Adam. So, you can follow him on X, formerly known as Twitter. His profile link is visible right now on your screen. So, don't forget to hit the follow button. So do follow him on the Twitter. Once again, Adam, thank you for your time and the wealth of knowledge you have shared. We would be thrilled to have you join us again for the future session on other insightful topics, maybe core web vitals, or we can discuss on uh, Chrome browser or with light speed and all the things.
Okay.
So a big,
Great.
a big thank, yeah, a big thank to our viewers and those who will be listening the recording. Your participation and engagement make these sessions meaningful. Until next time, stay safe and take care. Goodbye, and again, thank you so much, Adam, for your
Yes. Thank
valuable time.
you. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.